Hey there friends. In this video, let's try and make water terrain out of cardboard and texture paper. Pieces of water terrain can add a lot of depth to your tabletop games. They are a perfect way to add a more natural feel to any of your battlefields or tabletop adventures. And with easy techniques, the cheapest of materials, and a little cleverness with painting, I think we can get some pretty good results. For those who don't know me, my name is Selrahc, and on this channel we ask some hard-hitting questions, such as, can cardboard be turned into wood? And can cardboard be turned into stone? In our pursuit of knowledge, we are tireless, but to save you some time, the answer to both these questions is yes. You can do a lot more with cardboard than you might think. And now, having transformed cardboard into both wood and stone, logically, the next question is, can we turn cardboard into water? I initially attempted this project sometime after the First World War, but I think we can do a lot better today. Starting with a big piece of corrugated cardboard, we'll draw out some kind of blob shape because, I don't know, maybe that's natural. And once you're happy with how your shape looks, we will cut it out. We're starting small with our cardboard water terrain and making just a simple pond. But if we like how this turns out, it'll be really easy to take these same techniques and apply them to a river, swamps, pools, lots of possibilities. After you're happy with how our first blob shape looks, we're going to trace it out again on another piece of cardboard, but this time making sure that the corrugations run perpendicular to each other. This is just like how we make cardboard bases, and it will make our pond strong and very durable, resistant to warping. It'll help it keep its shape and look good. After you've got both of the pieces for your pond cut out in whatever shape you'd like, we'll glue them together. And again, just making sure that they're pressed together nicely and that we've got the corrugations running perpendicular to each other. We'll give it a few hours to dry, and then we can really get started. To begin, we'll use a craft knife and very carefully, while cutting away from ourselves, bevel the edges. I mean, sort of cut off the edges at an angle to give us this little slope. And as we cut off these pieces and tear them off, don't throw them away just yet. Once you've got it all beveled, all the little slope on all of its sides, what we're going to do is glue these pieces back on. The bits that we cut off, we'll glue them back on sort of randomly, and this will give us like the bank and the shoreline of our pond. The one thing I really didn't like about my first pond attempt is how you could still see the corrugations of the cardboard on top. So, taking some smooth cardstock, these were delicious by the way, we're going to scratch the back of it so that it will adhere better, and then sort of trace it out in the shape of our pond. That way we'll have a very smooth top layer upon which to put our texture paper and simulate the texture for water. Now that I think about it, it would be much easier to just trace out the blob shape when we already had it as a piece of cardboard, take that and then trace it out onto a big piece of cardstock. But this is what I had to work with, so this is how I did it. I wanted to get these pieces really close, really lined up together, but if there's a little gap, it's okay. It'll work out. If you've seen any of my videos before, you probably know that I'm not a perfectionist. I'm very big on covering up my mistakes, which sounds kind of bad now that I say it out loud. Moving on, we're going to take some white glue frequently called PVA glue or school glue, Elmer's glue, and paint it over most of the surface. Then we're going to take some texture paper and put that on top of the glue, pressing it in to make sure we've got good coverage. After the paper is on, we'll paint more glue on top of it. There's a couple reasons why we're covering the entire model pond in this texture paper and glue. One is that it will make it very strong and very solid. Two, for the banks of our pond, it will help hide the cardboard texture and transform it. And three, and perhaps most importantly, on the smooth surface on the cardstock, the glue and paper will help to create a lovely little water texture. I have problems doing one thing for a very long time, so I'd like to do it in steps. So I do half of the model and then let that dry. Then when it's dry, we can hold it by that part and do the other half. That's the same approach I use when painting on the prime and seal, the black base coat that we use as we finish out the detail stage. A big part of why I like using this texture paper instead of anything else for adding texture to pretty much all of my projects is that after you've got it on, if you use a stiff brush, you can sort of sculpt with it almost, make details, make little waves. After the first layer is dried, if you feel like your cardboard could use a little more disguise, a little more transformation, just put on another little layer over it. And for the water texture, I think I put on about 2 or 3 layers of paper because that really helped it look more watery and less cardboardy. With the last layer though in particular, I watered down my glue a bit to help it really penetrate through the paper as well. The paper is meant to dissolve in water, and so when your glue is a little bit thinner, I found it helps it makes it a little more interesting. Some people have asked exactly what paper do I use for my texture paper in my projects. I use Kirkland Signature toilet paper. I got a very big pack of it for not a lot of money, and it should last me for many, many years of projects and, possible emergencies as well. I think it doesn't matter so much what kind you use though. Any fairly cheap toilet paper you get should work. I use 2-ply. I've heard people say 1-ply might be good, but I think it's not thick enough to give us the texture we want. So I use a cheap 2-ply toilet paper, and when we do the stippling and the brushing, it doesn't really matter what kind of texture the paper had before. Like I said, it's almost like sculpting. So after you're happy with how the paper looks all over your model, we're going to paint on another little layer of glue and enter into the dirt step, where with some dirt and sand I gathered from my garden, I cover up the banks and the very beginning of like the shoreline with some dirt. This is another step, just like the paper, of use as much as you want until you're satisfied, until you like how it looks. Because if it looks cool, that's really what matters. And just like with our texture paper, once you're happy with your dirt coverage, we'll let it dry for a while. After it is all dried, we will take our base coat, which for this project is a mixture of black paint and matte Mod Podge, which is basically like a glue, except it has a little varnish component added as well. So it works as a base coat, it works as a primer and a sealer, and it helps protect everything that we've worked on, all the little details so far. I strongly recommend putting it on the water texture first. That way we won't get a lot of dirt and extra grit into our water. As you can see, I held it by a little bit while I painted all the rest, let that dry, and then finished it. Once it's all dry, we'll just take a brushy brush and simply use a white or off-white paint to dry brush the model and see how the work we did putting in our textures turned out. And we should have 2 distinctive textures here, one of dirt and one of water. This will make our work with painting pretty easy. With painting in mind, we want to show some depth, and so I don't apply the dry brush uniformly. Some parts are going to be lighter, some parts are going to be darker. And the big reason for that with our white or off-white dry brush is that lately I've been painting a lot of my terrain using very thinned down paints. So starting with this very thin brown, we will paint on the shoreline and then on the banks of the pond. And as you can see, it'll already have little variations. Some areas will be darker and some will be lighter depending on the base coat it had underneath it. But overall it creates a very nice ground and dirt look, I think. Little variations that you see in nature, not just a uniform color. A very easy way to get results that I think you'll be pretty happy with. After the first layer of our watered down brown has dried, I mix some of that same brown with our white paint and use it for a dry brush technique to add a little more variation and more highlights. I then took some of our first watered down brown and extended it out just a little bit because I wanted to try something sort of new, sort of like wet blending, where we take two different colors and try to sort of mix them while they're still wet. At this point, I wasn't sure what kind of results we would get, but I think it worked out pretty well and we stuck with it. I added a little more brown where necessary, and it gave us definitely a transition from the dirt brown to a brownish green to a green that will work well when we go to the water. So I had some of my thin down brown and thin down green both at the same time and just alternated between the two as necessary where I thought. Because the whole point of the blend is to get sort of a gradient, that's the word I was looking for, a gradient between the two colors. So brown to brownish green to green. Then from the green we'll go to a greenish blue by adding our watered down blue over parts of the green. And then from the greenish blue just to blue in the middle of the pond. I'm not very educated in the arts, and so I guess this is just me trying to explain it. But once we paint on the rest of the water with our blue, I think it will be pretty nice. We can already see with the unevenness of our off-white dry brush how we have some really dark parts of blue and some really light parts of blue, sort of implying an uneven depth. There were some parts I thought were a bit too bright, so I tried to use a very thin down black to darken them a little bit, almost to add a bit more like of a treacherous depth look to it. Following that, I took our white paint and did a very, very light dry brush along the shoreline to try and represent some foam. Then I mixed our blue and our white to get a light blue and just lightly dabbed that in some places too, again unevenly, but mostly to highlight the lighter parts of the water because I wanted the dark to still be dark. This was a good step to provide both a little more contrast, but I think it also worked to really tie all of the parts of the water texture together. This next step is one that might be a bit tedious for some people, so if you don't want to do it, don't do it. Everything is optional. But then I took a little bit of our light gray and thinned that down and just painted it on some of the more prominent stones, the bigger pieces of dirt. I also took this opportunity to cover up any more mistakes I made. If you really feel like being extra, like me, you can then take a wider off-white and very lightly dry brush that on those same stones you painted gray to highlight some of the edges. Finally, to give our water a bit more of a shine, I wanted to use a gloss coat. I've used regular glue just painted on top in the past, but for this, water-based. Got 'em. I don't know what water-based means, but given that we're trying to create water, it was good enough for me. So I then brushed a bunch of this gloss Mod Podge on the surface of the water and sort of stippled it around to avoid getting any brush strokes or lines from the brush left in the surface of the water texture. After it dried, I thought it had a pretty decent little shine. And this is definitely a piece of water terrain. Since it's a piece of natural terrain with dirt on the edges, I wanted to add some of my tea leaf flocking from green tea and chamomile that I've drank. So I painted on a little bit of glue and sprinkled it on. I started with the green because it was darker, and then a little more glue and sprinkled on some of the lighter brown and yellower leaves. I think it's a pretty good way to go. I like to pat it in to make sure it's kind of secure, and then I just added more wherever I felt would look good. I have a tendency to go overboard with things like flocking and washes, and so I've found that less is better. After that, I took some very watered down Mod Podge that I have in a spray bottle, though the bottle didn't spray very well, so I think an eyedropper would probably be better, and used that to really seal it in and make it rock solid. I wanted to add a little more color variation to the flock, so I mixed a brownish green and dry brushed it over it. I'm not sure if any of this step was really necessary. It might have looked just better the way it was. Then I tried dry brushing on some more of the green and some brown wash and stuff until I was fairly satisfied with how it all looked. But flocking and then painting the flocking is definitely a point of personal preference. If I had to do it again, I probably just wouldn't paint the flocking at all and just use its natural colors. But in the end, I'm really happy with how it turned out, so I was once again able to save myself from my mistakes. What do you think, my friends? Does this seem like some decent water terrain for being made from cardboard, texture paper, and dirt? The cheapest of craft paints? And a little bit of something to give it a shine. You could even use a nail polish. One thing I was impressed with this is that it actually did not warp at all during the making of it. If it did, I just would have sort of massaged the edges and bent it back down till it laid flat, but it worked really well the first time. So I think if you need some water terrain and you're crafting on a budget like I always am, this is a great way for you to go. Water terrain can be a wonderful thing to have on your tabletop, especially for any sort of natural battlefields. And with these techniques, you can make a pond, you could make a bigger lake, you could make rivers and streams and swamps, and you can make pools and fountains for your ruined cities and urban terrain, all from little cardboard and cardstock, dirt and texture paper. Thank you for watching, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. The lighting wasn't the best when I was crafting this, so I took some still photos of the pond itself with a little miniature for scale as well. And I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. It's such an easy and fast project. It's so cheap, and it gets some pretty good results. I hope you like it, my friends. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear anything about your experiments with making your own water terrain, how those turned out, and what you think of my little video on it. My Instagram account is linked in the description, and you can always send me pictures of anything you make, especially if it's based on a video of mine. I would love to see it. Take care until next time, my friends.